you can go back and rewatch it. So basically the process I'm going to follow is I'm just going to complete a CPA 52. We'll be using the CPPT version that was sent out earlier, but I did make, I found one little bug in the system and made a change to it. So it's mainly if you're using the weather resilience, the effects for, didn't show up all the things that needed to show up. So I'll make that available, kind of the updated version if anybody needs that. And pretty much it's going to work the same as what you have now, except if the the available water, I can't remember exactly what the term or what the name of the resource concern is, but it doesn't show up the effects of that. But anyway, so we're going to go through CPA 52 for EQIP, where we'll look at the CART results from EQIP and the applicability details reports. And then we'll complete the CPA 52, at least the resource concerns part of it. I'm not going to probably go into the whole thing, but show you kind of how to get that information from one to the other. So the first thing that you will need is that the CARTS results. So there is no way, of course, to print it directly from CART, but you can export it to a spreadsheet like I've done here. If you're not seeing the CART plan roll up, the list of resource concerns and existing totals and plan totals and thresholds. If you're not seeing that, let me know, but hopefully that's should be showing on your screen at this point. So basically what we would do is look at these resource concerns that were assessed, and any of these resource concerns that are assessed, they probably also needed to be included in the CPA 52. So if I go to the CPA 52, and we'll bring that in, give it a second to make sure it's displaying for you. Everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Okay. Then in this case, I would go in, I would select land uses. And this particular CART evaluation that we're looking at here, I think it's for a pasture situation. And we'd normally evaluate the concentrated erosion, degraded plant condition, field pesticide loss, etc. So basically what you're mainly doing is making sure that the resource concerns that you've identified to assess here in CART are actually included in your CPA 52. So I would come over here, and if I do pasture, it's going to identify probably the recommended resource concerns to address, and I can just go ahead and select the recommended, so it selects all of those that do show up as green, as highlighted. And then at that point, I would probably go back to the CART results. So the first one is classic gully erosion. We had that one on there. We had plant productivity and health. I'm not sure we had the field pesticide loss, because in the here I didn't mark that pesticides were applied. So I'd probably go ahead and mark that pesticides were applied, and probably also that nutrients were applied on this pasture. So it will bring in those other ones, and I can click select recommended again, and it'll mark all of those that are recommended. So basically, you're trying to match the ones that you have checked here with what you have on your CART results. So we've got our concentrated erosion, degraded plant condition, the field pesticide loss. We've got the nutrients transported to ground and surface water. We've got the livestock production limitation. On soil quality, the only one that we evaluated here was the compaction. If I go back to my CPA 52, notice the recommended one for pasture includes all of those, and maybe I don't need the other ones. I'm going to uncheck those so it will match what's in my cart results. We look further, weather resilience, the naturally available moisture use, and sheet and rill erosion. So I just want to make sure I've got the sheet and rill erosion. I've also got wind erosion marked, so I don't really need that one. And as far as the human considerations, you can just pick whichever ones would be applicable to your particular land use and the client's objectives, etc. So maybe he's not too concerned about management or labor, but profitability, risk, land use might be important to him. So I'm going to check those. That way, the information that I selected here should match the resource concerns that I have selected here on the cart plan rollup. Once I select those, then I can go in and hit prepare form. This will go ahead and put the information on the CPA 52 form so now we see the particular resource concerns that I have identified in my cart ranking or cart assessment. So, and you can do this either way you wanted to. You can follow along on cart and go and mark these, or go in the order that they are on the CPA 52. So for an example, in this situation, the next thing I would do is, of course, we would go ahead and fill out our client information, the client conservation plan ID. I'd use the practice schedule name here, program if it was equip, enter the farm, track field numbers, the client objective, and the need for action. So you want to make sure you have all that information filled out at the top. Then I'm just going to go through the process of how do I answer the questions for these benchmarks. And basically, you would refer to your cart roll-up results and look at the existing total. For this case, the concentrated erosion, classic gully erosion, the existing total is 51 and the threshold is 50. So the existing is greater than the threshold. So I could come here under classic gully erosion, and I'm just going to put not a resource concern. The cart assessment existing condition is above the threshold. So we see that. Let's go ahead and look at the sheet and rill erosion while we're there. If we come down here, the sheet and rill erosion is actually on the bottom under water and wind and water erosion. And notice the existing condition is below the threshold. So in that case, I would come over here and I would choose the narrative that says existing condition is below threshold. So that's pretty simple. You just go through that process following along. Let's look at the soil quality limitations, compaction. Its existing condition is above the threshold. So again, you would just mark that. That it's above the threshold. The naturally available moisture use, this is easier if you had this printed out so you could just refer to it without having to switch back and forth on the computer. Natural available moisture use is actually below the threshold. So it is a resource concern. So we would come over here and mark that it is below the threshold. So basically we would just go through that process of completing all those benchmarks based on these cart results. The nutrients are below the threshold. The sediment is below the threshold. So I would come in here and the nutrients below threshold, and sediment below threshold. If you look at the pesticides, let's go back to the report. Fill pesticides, looks like they're all above the threshold, so they are not a resource concern. So we would just mark those that it's above the threshold and it's not a resource concern. The plants, let's look at the degraded plant condition, plant productivity and health, and structure and composition are below the threshold. while we're there, you can also look at plant pest pressure. I think that's listed under plants. And this one is one that has the 3 different criteria, and it met on 2 of them, but didn't meet on 1 of them. So we would mark that it was below the threshold. So we'll come over here. Plant productivity and health is below the threshold. Plant structure and composition is below the threshold, and plant pest pressure is below the threshold. And then finally, we would look at our feed and forage, or our livestock production limitations. So the livestock production limitations show that the feed and forage is below and the water is below. The shelter is above the threshold. So we would come in here and put feed and forage below the threshold, shelter above the threshold, and water is below the threshold. So we have now documented all the benchmark conditions for that particular evaluation from the CART results. The next thing is, while we're in there, we could go ahead and I would want to go ahead and describe the existing alternative, what's going to happen if he takes no action. And we're just going to say he's going to continue the existing operation. Of course, then we got to record the effects of that existing operation. And basically, if it is a resource concern currently, then it's probably going to continue. And you can either choose it's going to continue, or you may even choose it's going to increase without our assistance and put a reason why, or it may decrease without our assistance. So basically, the bottom 3 are for it if it is a resource concern. So I'm going to choose that one. And then the top 2 are basically that it's not a resource concern. The first one is it's not a resource concern and it's not expected to occur. The second one is it's currently not a resource concern, but it could become a resource concern if he doesn't take any action. So you just kind of have to use your judgment on that one. So basically, the first 2 are for if it is not a resource concern. The last 3 are for if it is a resource concern currently. So, we would go through and document those according to what we suspect. And another thing is, you don't have to choose these drop downs. You can actually, if you're going to have several that have the same, you can hit Control C, which will copy that, and then just Control V and paste those in. Sometimes that's a little faster than clicking the drop downs. So I can come down here and paste all those that are currently resource concerns in there, any of the red ones. And then we got all those, and the ones that are not a resource concern, I'm going to copy that and paste it basically in the green ones. So there we have documented our no action alternative. And of course, if it is a current resource concern and it's going to continue, then we would want to check the not meet PC box for any of those that are currently a resource concern or that could become a resource concern without our assistance. So I'm marking all those as red that not meet PC. Okay, so that's kind of the way to document the benchmark condition and the no action alternative. I might just pause for a second there and just ask if there's any questions. Anybody have a question or a comment that you'd like to have discussed at this time? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to proceed on. The next thing would be for me to go ahead and look at our alternative, what we're doing here. And this is the way I would handle that. I would go to the View Applicability Details report. and I would just scroll down here and look at the practices that are going to be in this alternative. Now notice that we have some practices that are excluded. They're not selected for cost share, and that's you can put those on there or not. I'm going to go ahead and include some practices that may not be included. You would not have to put, say, for instance, the 314 in this alternative, but you might do it just in case. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about why you might do that at some point. But the first thing I would do is there's a couple of ways to enter the practices for this alternative. One is to go over here in this steps, and you can actually click on enter practices and scroll down to your particular land use and select the individual practices. That works fine, except to me that takes a little longer. I usually like to go to this formulate button here. So I'm going to click on the pasture button, which takes me to the list of practices that will have positive effects for the pasture land. Did I hear a question? Maybe it's just my phone. Now, keep in mind that when you do this, only practices are going to show up here that have a positive effect. So in some cases, some of your practices may not show up. So if I go back to my list of practices, you'll see that, I've got, brush management, fence, forage and biomass planting, livestock pipeline, prescribed grazing, heavy use area protection, and water facility. And if you'll notice, we do have the brush management listed, but notice that heavy use area is sometimes some of the practices may not show up here. Looks like probably all those are going to show up as having positive effects. So if some of your practices don't show up, you can always go show all practices, and it'll show the list of all the practices that are available. But in this case, I'm just going to start down through here and do, you can mark these with a P for primary or S for supporting, or you can just mark them with an X, or you can mark them, any text that you put in there will select them. So I'm going to go ahead and show the brush management as a primary. We go down to we also listed the heavy use area protection. I'm just going to put that as an S because it is generally a supporting practice. Notice our fence did not show up. So if we go back here, go back here, look, one of the practices is fence, and it doesn't show up on the list. Does that mean you can't use fence? No, it does not. You just have to click on show all practices so that it will give you a complete list of all practices, whether or not they have a positive effect or not. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that fence as supporting practice. We got our heavy use area. Our prescribed grazing. I think livestock pipeline. I think that was one. It doesn't really matter in this situation if you put a P or an S or even an X or A or whatever number, whatever text you want to type in there. Let's check and see. So I've got brush management, fence. I think I missed the forage and biomass planting. I got the pipeline, the heavy use area. So I need the watering facility and the forage and biomass planting. So I think I've got all my practices, and if I can click this show selected, it'll actually show me the practices that I have selected here. So I've got brush management, fence, forage and biomass planting, heavy use area protection, livestock pipeline, prescribed grazing, and watering facility. And that should match what I've got here. And it does. So now then, what I would recommend you do is at this point, you just go ahead and click this copy selected to alternative 1. That copies it back to that practices sheet that we looked at earlier. And like I said, we could have went into this sheet to begin with and entered these practices manually, but I like picking them over there. It's a little bit easier for me to find the practice instead of having to, click here, scroll all the way down to find a practice, and you have to repeat that several times. So once that's done, then we can go over here and click, we can click either any of these buttons that say save all practices and return to CPA 52. We'll do that. Once we do that, the macros will run to populate the effects of all those selected practices on our individual resource concerns. Now, at this point, we see here that all these practices have an effect on sheet and rill erosion. The question is, do they completely solve the problem? And the answer is, on our CART results, wind and water erosion, we put those practices in, but they still did not solve the problem. The planned total is still less than the threshold. If that's the case, you would come in here and you'd mark that it not meet PC, because even though we've had an effect, it still did not totally solve the problem. Same thing with natural available moisture use. So let's look at that one. So if we go to natural available moisture use, those practices we do now under the plan total, they do exceed the threshold. So in that case, we would not check this box that it does not meet PC, because now it will meet PC. The nutrients transported to ground and surface waters, again, we would look at this. Nutrients, notice that it still does not meet the planning criteria. The plan total is still less than the threshold. So we would go in and we'd mark this not meet PC boxes for, well, that was sediment. I didn't check yet, but let's look at it. Sediment, yeah, it still does not meet. So again, any of those that still do not meet the threshold, we would mark those. So basically, that's the process that you would go through, just going through and checking all of those. Now, another thing that I like about this is that we included that brush management, and that practice was not selected for funding. So, the alternative that he's going probably to accept at this time probably is not going to include brush management. So maybe we want to create a alternative that doesn't include brush management, because that is the one that will actually be the selected one. So what I would do is I can come back here. You can go over here to this enter practices, and notice here are all my practices for alternative 1. I don't have anything in alternative 2. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy all the practices from alternative 1 to alternative 2, and I'm just going to scroll up here and choose the blank for brush management. That takes it out of the system. So then once I do that, I can go ahead and hit save all practices and return to the CPA 52. And then it will populate the second alternative with all the same practices, all the effects, except it doesn't include brush management. It doesn't include the practice that he's not going to do. And again, you would check to make sure, and these probably, since this didn't meet and we took a practice out, it's probably still not going to meet. So basically, that's the way that you can populate And notice the effects. This one has the effects of brush management. This one does not have the effects of the brush management practice because he's probably not going to do that. And of course, we would go ahead and make sure you fill out the special environmental concerns, but I'll just show you down here. I would come down here, and the alternative that he's going to implement at this point is actually alternative 2, because he did not, the brush management was not included in his contract in this situation, so he's probably not going to do it. So why not create an alternative that does not include that practice? So basically, in this situation, we have 2 alternatives. We have the one that we actually evaluated that had the brush management in it, but since brush management wasn't selected for funding and he's probably not going to do it, then we would probably just create another alternative that didn't include the brush management. So that's basically the process of getting this information from the CART results into the CPA 52. And as you can see, it's taken me about 26 minutes to complete that information for this assessment to document the resource concerns. So hopefully that'll speed up the process of doing that. Now, I granted that you still will have a lot of information to enter here on the special environmental concerns and filling out the rest of the CPA 52, but hopefully that can speed up the process of doing that. So I'm going to pause right now for a few moments and see if anybody has any questions, about practices you need to include, etc. And if we don't have any on that, we will go on into CSP here in just a second. Questions?
Johnny, I got a question.
Okay.
I went into one, and one of mine was showing long-term protection of the land on the results page in CART, and I didn't see that on the resource concerns that you could select.
It's not on the CPA 52.
Okay.
It is. I mean, you selected that for assessment. Generally, that resource concern is going to be one that's going to tie in with land protection programs such as WRE, Wetland Reserve, I think the farmland protection. So that's why those resource concerns have been added, but it's not really, it's not truly a resource concern. So the CPA 52 just lists the resource concerns, and long-term protection of land will not be included at this point.
I had one more question. I noticed the form you're using it says copy of CPTT version 4 updated. Did you send that out recently, or is that one that hasn't been out yet? Or because the one I got don't say the updated part, and it looks a little bit different.
The thing that I noticed is, and I made an update to it, was the water. Let's see if I can find it. I always have trouble finding that water use. Naturally available moisture use. The one that's out, and this one hasn't been sent out, but I was planning on sending it out today after this training. When you choose this one, there was an error with it putting the effect in, and it would just say no effect. And so that has been updated. If you're not using that resource concern or you're not dealing with it, it's probably not a big deal. And even if you did deal with it and you've already printed one out, it's probably not a big deal. But this new one will actually populate this correctly. The old one, it would just say no effect here under natural available moisture use. I had a cell formatted wrong and it wasn't pulling in the right information, so I fixed that.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Any other questions? Okay, so basically, completing the upper part, this is your resource concern part from CART. And of course, you would have to still go in and document the benchmarks for the land uses, capital, profitability, etc. It does bring the effects in for those. You still also need to do the no action one, and you would need to populate, the different special environmental concerns that you have out there. And if anything is going to be needs to be done, you're going to need cultural resources, threatened and endangered species, Clean Water Act, Section 404 and 303 and 402. Just document, the effects of those individual alternatives on those special environmental concerns. And then, of course, record any easements, permissions, public reviews, permits, etc. in here. Just make sure that you pick one of these alternatives as the preferred alternative, the one he's going to do, and the context, and the planner would sign it. And then, of course, the responsible federal official would complete the rest of it. So that's basically the rest of the process. I didn't really we've kind of covered that before. I just mainly wanted to cover, what you would need to look at on these resource concerns. So let's take a look at CSP. It is a little bit different on the process that you would follow. So I'm going to go ahead and close this spreadsheet and save it. And we'll close the CART results for our equip and open up our CART results for CSP. So bear with me just a second while I get those forms open. And basically, we're going to look at similar information for CSP or similar reports. And you might want to look at the CSP Classic report also, but because that can give us a little information also. So I'm going to pull those over here in just a second. Let me go ahead and get my spreadsheet open. So if someone can verify, they can see the CSP 2020 plan roll-up.
Yes.
Okay. And also that, let this load. And you can see the CPA 52 spreadsheet. This is a different one. This is for our CSP. Yes. Okay. And I've went ahead and with this one, the process would be the same for documenting these benchmark conditions. You would basically, again, I would probably go to this copy of the CART report. And in this case, this is CSP. So there's a lot more resource concerns that we've identified. Notice that, most of them looks like they've met the threshold, which means that this category is met. It's not met on field sediment, nutrient, and pathogen loss. It's not met on storage and handling of pollutants or on wind and water erosion. So those, and you can even look at this. This does have the different land uses. This one has an associated ag land, a farmstead, and then we'll get to our pasture. So here's, it met concentrated erosion, degraded plant condition, it met, but it didn't meet the field sediment, nutrient, and pathogen loss. And those are the only ones that are critical here for CSP. There was a couple others that didn't meet, but they weren't included on this CSP Classic. So we see here, these are the ones that show met. And that's, I don't know that it's more of just a check to make sure, this and this kind of match. But I would probably look more at this as far as documenting the benchmark conditions, because it lists the individual resource concerns. On the report, the classic report, it just shows concentrated erosion. Well, concentrated erosion is both classic gully and, in this case, bank erosion. It tells you if it meets the degraded plant condition, which it does, but it's actually meeting both plant productivity and health and plant structure and composition. So you can kind of see these are the ones that show up on the CSP report, but these are the ones that you're actually going to document on the CPA 52 as these resource concerns. So I've went ahead with this one and put in that information, documented which ones were met, which ones were not met, and went ahead and recorded the no action effects. Since CSP is a little different, I want you to actually describe this alternative. I'm not going to use these formulate alternative buttons. Instead, I'm going to use this select CSP enhancement button. So I can click here and it takes me to the CSP enhancements table, which is different than the practice table. So here now I see here are the CSP enhancements that pertain to pasture land. You can actually go down through here, and since I marked that that did have associated ag land, we see some enhancements for that also, and enhancements for the farmstead. But in this case, if we look at one of the other things that probably would be good to look at is this applicability details report. And if you'll notice, the applicability detail report shows that the farmstead is excluded and the associated ag land is excluded. So these are not included in the CSP. I'm not going to go into the reason and when you can exclude them and when you include them and all that stuff. That's a program's issue. So if anybody has any questions about that, check with Ron. So, but anyway, so I'm mainly looking at the enhancements that I'm going to do on the pasture. And if you scroll down far enough, you'll see here's the enhancements that he's going to do on his pasture land. So if I go back to the CPA 52, I'm going to mark that EAP1 and EAP2. And then he's also going to do E338A and E512I and E595B, if I can remember all those. So 338A, 512I, and 595B. So go down here, 338A, right there. 512I, right there. And I forgot the last one. 595B. Now, this table allows you to select those enhancements. It doesn't allow you to select practices. In some cases, you may need to add practices for your CSP. If you need to add a practice, for example, 595, you would click on this Add Conservation Practices. So it would actually take you to the Conservation Practices window where you could add a 595 practice, not just the 595 enhancement. If you don't need to add any practices, you can just click on this Save Alternative and return to CPA 52. And when you do that, it will populate this information and show the effect. I think I missed a button. Let me try that again. Been a while since I've done this. Let's go back to that select CSP. I think I also have to hit copy selected to alternative first. That's kind of why I put these in this order. These are tools that you can use to show things. You would copy it to the selected alternative, and then you would save that alternative and return to the CPA 52. Forgot that step, so keep that in mind. Once you get your practices selected, click copy selected to alternative. And then if you need to add any conservation practices, you would click this button. If you don't need to add any conservation practices, you would just click this button, which will take you back to the CPA 52 and populate the effects. So now my listed practices or effects are in here. It shows the effects, and most of the time there's no effect except on the particular, excuse me, particular resource concern that, for example, E338 is designed to enhance plant pest pressure. 512 is designed to enhance terrestrial habitat. So there's not going to be a whole lot of effects except for the actual individual resource concern that enhancement is tailored to enhance. We can go back and look if you wanted to. You can come in here and let's say, for instance, I also needed to add a 512 because he hasn't, or maybe let's say 595. He's not doing 595 at this point, and before I can do the enhancement, I got to add the practice. So I can come here. Notice all the practices are listed, or all the enhancements are listed, but I would also want to choose integrated pest management, which is right here. And then I would save all practices and return to the CPA 52. And it will add that practice to the list, integrated pest management 595, and also add any effects that might have for other things. Here looks like it's integrated pest management has a little bit of effect on plant pest pressure. We didn't have our pesticides is not listed. It wasn't a resource concern that we evaluated. So, but anyway, that just basically combines those two. Here it tells IPM mitigation can reduce the field operations, etc. So that's the two ways to do it. You can either just select them here and go directly to your CPA 52. Of course, once you've selected them, copy it to the alternative, and then you can either go directly to the CPA 52, or if you need to add some practices, you can click Add Conservation Practices, which will take you to this practice screen, and you can add any conservation practices that need to be included. Then your CPA 52 will have the results here, and again, documenting the not meet PC is based on this, the cart results. Notice the nutrients transported to surface water did not meet, existing did not meet, and planned did not meet. So we go down to nutrients, they didn't meet. Oh, I'm sorry, wrong checkbox, should have been this one. And, again, if you wanted to create a second alternative here from the select practices, you can copy it over here and make any changes you want to, and then it will be a second alternative. All right, questions on that? So the main difference is for equip, I would probably use these buttons to select the practices. For CSP, I would use this select CSP enhancement, select the enhancements, and then if you needed to add any practices, you can still do that. All right, questions?
Johnny, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm still not sure where to go and export that plan roll-up from cart. Is there an
Okay.
export function, or do you just have to kind of select all that and copy and paste it?
I have basically I select all that and copy and paste it. If you look at those and we should be using the cart results print 2020B. It's a spreadsheet. And basically you can just go to cart and look at the instructions. It'll tell you exactly where you need to copy because it's kind of particular. You have to copy the right place. And then once you do that, you just copy it, go back to that spreadsheet and click the paste button and it'll paste it where it needs to go.
Okay.
Yeah, these two documents here were created from that spreadsheet because there is no cart results. You can't print it from cart. You have to copy it and paste it. I think, let me see if I can pull that up right quick. Yeah, the spreadsheet basically, and you can do it one of two ways. I usually, from the first page, I would copy this information, the assessment summary. You can copy this and paste it in. Then you can go to the plan roll up. You can copy the information. Once you've copied it, you just click this paste button, it'll paste it in here. You can actually do it by field if you wanted to. You know, in the cart results, you can view the plan roll up, copy that, paste it into this plan roll up tab. Then you can go to the first field, copy it, paste it in here, and just keep doing that until you get all the fields pasted in if you wanted to. But mainly for completing the CPA 52, I would probably just go by this plan roll up to paste that information in. Other questions? All right, well, I will stop our recording and